Merci à vous d'être parmi nous. Alors, je vais commencer par vous, Monsieur Haïdara. Donc, vous êtes directeur adjoint, je l'ai bien dit, de l'OSF. Au cours des 3 derniers jours, nous avons exposé les challenges qui rencontrent le continent, de nombreux challenges. Comme je l'ai dit en début, certains nous sont imposés, d'autres, finalement, nous les créons par nous-mêmes. Alors, comment est-ce qu'on peut trouver le bon équilibre, finalement, entre dénoncer ce qui ne va pas, sans pour autant froisser ceux qui peut-être ont du mal à admettre leurs erreurs et à regarder en face ce qui se passe. On en a parlé également.
Merci, Madame la modératrice. Je voudrais d'abord remercier les organisateurs, les partenaires et tous les participants pour leur participation active à cette 3e conférence sur l'endettement et le développement en Afrique. Comme la modératrice a dit, les facteurs d'endettement sont multiples. Il y a effectivement des facteurs exogènes. Bien entendu, il y a des facteurs endogènes qui devraient être à chaque niveau bien situés, bien analysés, comprendre et à partir de ce moment-là pouvoir faire des recommandations pertinentes de politique, de stratégie et d'action pour adresser de façon durable la crise de la dette qui, comme vous le savez, pour ce qui nous concerne, est cyclique. Et le cycle de la crise est assez court. Rappelez-vous que nous venons de sortir seulement de l'initiative des pays pauvres très endettés il y a de cela à peine 10 ans. Et aujourd'hui, de nombreux pays de ce continent-là sont en train de faire défaut pour le paiement de leurs dettes et beaucoup d'autres sont au bord de faire défaut. Donc, je pense que, pour répondre directement, il n'y a pas de gêne à situer les causes de la crise de l'endettement. Si ça se situe à l'intérieur, je pense qu'il faut le diagnostiquer très clairement et de façon objective, mais aussi les causes exogènes, il faut aussi les situer et les dire comme telles et apporter des solutions radicales, comme le dirait le jeune parlementaire du Kenya. Je pense qu'il nous faut des solutions radicales et sans gêne, si on veut arriver donc au bout de cette crise qui est cyclique et qui affecte négativement notre développement.
Merci beaucoup. Ça renvoie à cette notion également que nous mentionnons depuis le début de cette conférence d'audace, d'oser prendre des risques et avec beaucoup de fierté et la tête haute. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Haïdara. Monsieur Alamayehou, je me tourne vers vous à présent. Alors, vous luttez avec passion depuis de nombreuses années pour que le continent prenne véritablement les rênes de son porte-monnaie, j'ai envie de dire, les rênes de ses modèles financiers. En début de semaine, le G20 a plaidé pour que l'Afrique devienne membre permanent. Comment, selon vous, l'AfCoDD et d'autres organismes de ce genre peuvent soutenir ce type d'avancée?
It's a big pleasure as an aging African to see the evolution and the growth of TGNA and AfCoDD, not only as civil society actors but also as conveners on different issues which have started negotiating and dialoguing with Pan-African institutions and African governments as well. I remember when I joined African civil society, Arab boy running around and shouting, NGOs are thieves, don't talk to them. And I acknowledging even the policy space issue around us, it is really a big advance that African civil society. And for me, it is really a pleasure to see this growth and development. Coming to this question, I will start with the historical achievement Chennai referred to earlier about what the Africa Group achieved at the United Nations. And why for Africa? In the first place, there was a lot of mention to it. Africa can go nowhere without strengthening Pan-Africanism. This is the first point. Only a united Africa can achieve anything. The second one is the home for Africa to play a role in global politics, in global governance, is by strengthening the United Nations. There is this talk of trying to get Africa as a member of the G20. First thing, why was the G20 created? It was created to bypass the UN. It was created to avoid the noise of poor countries. So now, why should Africa then even think of joining such an institution, which is created to weaken the United Nations? And then the second issue is, go to any international issue and discussion at the United Nations. Who is blocking it? The blockers are the ones who created the G20. So why should now any solution be sought outside the United Nations? Because if these guys want to solve the global problems, they could have done it in the UN. Who is blocking debt restructuring mechanism? Who is blocking a UN process to reform international tax rules? Who is blocking any progress globally other than the US, UK, and the other states? Now, so why should Africa leave the space where it can be effective and try to join forces which are blocking? And there is also a fundamental truth. Oligarchy can never be democratized. Oligarchs, the very definition of oligarchy is not to be equal. So by going to them, I am afraid actually, it is the place where Africa will be tamed and lose its influence at the United Nations. We have seen what it meant for us as Africans that South Africa joined the G20. All the decisions of the G20 are impacting negatively on the progress Africa could have achieved at the global level. Take the tax resolution which was referred to. The G20 is doing something else. They are the ones who mandated the OECD to do the reforms which are not going to bring anything to Africa. So why should Africa now join the blockers instead of continuing its successful engagement within the UN system? In which, and then it was very interesting, there was an Africa resolution. The US submitted an amendment which was to water down the Africa resolution. The US lost and Africa won. This is the equation now. So Africa should focus itself, be united, and work effectively within the UN. It is the only universal institution where instead of going to them and be tamed, it is the only space where they can tame the blockers. So the UN is the central space for Africa to try to change, to bring its contribution to change the global governance in all the areas, tax, debt restructuring, and everything else.
Thank you very much. Et je pense que vous êtes un merveilleux exemple de ce que nous avons mentionné un petit peu plus tôt, d'avoir cette pensée indépendante, get out of the box, trouver nos propres solutions et de ne pas suivre justement ce qui a été fait juste parce que cela a été fait. Vous rappelez également l'importance du panafricanisme et encore une fois, j'aimerais répéter que le futur sera panafricain ou il ne sera pas. Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, monsieur. Je me tourne à présent vers vous, Madame Reyes. Vous êtes une référence, il faut le savoir, en matière de lutte pour la parité, l'égalité des genres, les carcans du patriarcat au travers de l'Amérique latine, notamment au Mexique. Et c'est vrai, finalement, que l'on retrouve des schémas semblables entre nos deux régions, l'Afrique et l'Amérique latine. Alors, avec l'expérience que vous avez de plusieurs pays, de plusieurs régions du monde, quels sont, selon vous, les paramètres que nous devons prendre en compte pour avancer vers un nouvel ordre des choses ?
Thank you so much for this. I just want to say I'm extremely honored to be here just because I'm also from the Global South, and I've been hearing the way you've all tackled so many challenges with so much ingenuity, creativity, and rigorous thinking. And I think it's an example. And to the world, as we hear the debate here in the region about joining the G20, from the outside, we look at you as leaders that we want to follow and to try to convey our path towards the way you are leading, because the way the African region joined towards a tax convention has been remarkable. We think that in the Latin American region, we have the most progressive leftist governments, but we were unable even to achieve a minimum agreement on tax justice or on debt or anything really, because we are very much divided. And there is also this split between some countries who claim to be OECD, so if you want to join the wealthy club, and others who are fighting for their survival without having this clear vision of where we want to get. So the two keywords for me, reimagining and rethinking, are key. Because if we cannot imagine the world we want, we cannot convey the steps, the rational steps, the practical steps that will take us there. And I think you've all been doing that here, and the region has shown us that there is a world they're imagining, and they're taking the practical steps to arrive there. So I just want to say, for me, it's an honor to be in this space, which is also, you know, the boiling place in which all of these ideas are coming to fruition, and I know that they will be implemented. But I do also want to say that, also coming from the Global South, and knowing that there is this epistemic coloniality, right? We are all being forced to talk into certain codes and language and technical lingo, whereas we have our own analysis. And we know that the colonial dynamics are still happening now. We've learned that from all of our ancestors who have told us what is the harm that has been done in our territories. And the current imperial practices are now hidden as new technical terms that we need to learn and that we need to abide by, for instance, climate finance or sustainable development, etc. But we know these are tricks. We know what lies behind it, and it's another way to impose extraction in our territories. So never forgetting what are the extractive dynamics. And now we are seeing that there's a new wave of extractivism in steroids, with these new Green New Deals that are coming from the Global South and that want to impose on us in the name of great trade deals and new ways to bring foreign currency, etc., to sell our rare minerals, to extract our rare minerals, for them to transition into a new era of generation of energy, whereas we are still seeing that our people is depleted of the basic rights and the basic access to every service. So I think for us, we need to be very mindful. And I said, the rethinking is really important. What do we know from our hearts, from our bodies in our territories? And we know we had had the analysis all this time, and we need to hold on to that and reapply it in a different manner in the way the context keeps on shifting. So I think this is a major lesson, because for us also as feminists, we keep on going back to the analysis that other feminist traditions taught us. And now we know that women are subsidizing the economy the same way that indigenous peoples now are subsidizing the biodiversity. So I guess that is the type of challenges that we need to take on forward, how to build stronger connections with the feminist movement, with the indigenous peoples and local communities movements, and have a piece of all of their wisdom. We need to be humble and understand that our movement may be extremely powerful on some points, but it lacks the capacity to have a comprehensive view. So only in the addition of all of the voices we will be having the thorough solutions and the complex solutions that we need. We cannot have just a single answer, right? So I just want to close in saying that we don't have much time. we think that we are living in a multi-layer crisis, whatever, and we add debt, tax, whatever. The world is dying. Really, we have surpassed 7 out of 9 planetary boundaries. So we are not in the same moment as in which the 80s, or when we had multi-layer crisis. No, we are in an exceptional moment in history of the planet in which we are facing the danger of the life of all of the species and the ecosystems as we've known them for all this time. So we need to be mindful that this capitalistic predatory system is directly generating this ecocide. So adding to all of the generation of inequalities, we are witnessing an ecocide that is happening in our own territories because of the unsustainable modes of production and consumption of global north countries. So being very mindful of that, I think we need to act, we need to have steadily, but also we need to act fast. We cannot keep on imagining a future that is 100 years ahead of us. We need to act fast, and that means that we need to also challenge ourselves in what we can do and how radical we can be so that we don't compromise not only our principles, but also the life that we have in our hands. But I'm very certain that the African region can lead precisely because at the core of your values and principles that you have all shared with the world is the notion of collective rights that go beyond the human rights framework, meaning that you know that the collectivity is the answer to a new way of relationships in economic practices and social practices and political practices. So again, I think you have most of the solutions, and I very much look forward to keep on engaging with all of you in this collective manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, et je pense que votre présence ici est très symbolique également, car comme on l'a dit, nos continents ont beaucoup de similarités, et même géographiquement, nous sommes face à face. Et merci beaucoup d'avoir partagé cette expérience ici, qui finalement fait écho à ce que nous connaissons sur le continent. Vous avez mentionné également le droit des peuples indigènes. Je sais que la société civile mexicaine fait énormément pour la reconnaissance des droits des communautés indigènes, afro-mexicaines. Donc merci pour le travail excellent que vous faites. Et c'est également ce que nous tentons de faire ici en Afrique pour reconnaître le droit. Effectivement, c'est une collaboration de toutes les communautés. C'est un message très fort. Merci beaucoup. Je vais enfin vous passer la parole, Monsieur Prato, pour conclure donc cette courte discussion. L'année dernière au Malawi, vous aviez mentionné l'importance de renforcer la coopération avant la prochaine conférence internationale sur le financement du développement. Alors j'aimerais vous demander où est-ce qu'on en est un an plus tard, donc après vos propos. Est-ce qu'il y a eu du progrès? Et si oui, comment est-ce que, on peut préserver les progrès qui ont été faits?
Thanks so much, first of all, to AfCoDD for the invitation and Anne-Marie for the question. I'm going to take a slightly different angle to that because I'm going to try to do my best not to get invited to AfCoDD IV. And in order to do that, I want to challenge the idea that we had in these 3 days that the international financial architecture is our main focus. I can't disagree with that, of course, right? But I disagree with the fact that that's the starting point. And I want to insist, as many have actually done, first our fantastic lecturer on the opening day, on the centrality of the real economy transformation. Because my impression is that sometimes in contrasting financialization, we became financialized ourselves. In only been discussing financial flows as the primary focus of our deliberations when it comes to economic reform agendas. And I think we need to challenge that, because the reality, as we all agree, is eventually the core of the problem is the structure of the African economies. This is where people live and die. This is where the grip of patriarchy continue to exist. This is where the gender subsidy continue to subsidize profit making. This is where the structures of colonialism, exactly as Opa mentioned in his opening lecture, continue to persist. And this is what generates the very lower end spot where the region continue to feature in global value chains, which are really global grabbing chains when it comes to the structure and the vision of labor within the global economy. But you all know these things, and we all agree with them. The challenge is that we only agree with them as choreographical statements. Because if I ask people in this room to stand and raise their hand and see who actually engages actively in rethinking and reorganizing the structure of the economies, there will be very few hands raised. So why is that we can't make this the core of our focus? If we work on debt, the systemic determinants of borrowing is the structure of the African economies. If we work on tax, the fundamental impediment in generating domestic crisis mobilization is the structural economy. I can go on. So my claim is that if we are really serious in the radical transformation that we've been discussing here, we need to put the focus back on addressing the structural transformation agenda, not only as a choreography, as that statement with which we open our discourses, but then we move on and deal with other things, as the fundamental core of our agency and our collective agency. And this is what takes me to the global. There's no solutions in the global. And I think sometimes we spend too much time in thinking that we need to engage in the global because we want to seek a solution on tax justice, debt justice, and everything else. The global is just a space where we need to reaffirm and renegotiate a sovereignty that was lost. Which means that when we engage with the global space, the issue is not so much to look for policy alternatives or new arrangements. The issue is to renegotiate a different institutional setup that really leads to the democratization of economic governance, away from the very strong grip that developed countries and the institutions that they command continue to exercise. It's to stop being consulted on debt, tax, and other policies. What decisions ultimately is taken by a few. And this means that the fundamental turf where to lead that struggle is the United Nations, in shifting the barycenter of economic governance away from Bretton Woods institutions, OECDs, and other developed country clubs in a new set of regulation, norms, and institutions centered around the United Nations. Again, maybe one day they will be able to offer solutions, but today is fundamentally a quest for reaffirmation and renegotiation of sovereignty. But that negotiation of sovereignty needs to come from a real economy transformation agenda. Otherwise, it's just seeking concessions. Now, the opportunity there is certainly the financing for development process and generally the United Nations space. And the fact that there is now a possible fourth financing for development conference provides us for an interesting turf where to engage. But we need to be clear, again, that there are no solutions in the global. The engagement is to reaffirm and negotiate sovereignty and shift barycenters away from current power centers. So engagement with the G20, engagement with the international financial institutions need to be challenged seriously, because what we do in that engagement is ultimately requesting others to take decisions on the region's development pathway. So in that sense, then the United Nations offer a space that has jurisdiction, that is democratic, at least on paper, that offers the possibility to tame economic governance with developmental consideration, to integrate across different areas, debt, trade, tax, and more, and where we as civil society can rightfully engage. But we need to be clear on the strategy. The strategy needs to come from the developmental real economy transformation of the region and from that engage in the global space to reaffirm that sovereignty, not to seek a solution.
Thank you very much. Well, I think that you made sure that you'll be with us next time because we love a good debate. So thank you very much for pushing the conversation even further. C'est très appréciable. Et justement, pour pousser la conversation encore plus loin, je vous demanderai d'accueillir à présent Monsieur Martin Kessler, directeur exécutif de Finance for Development Lab, s'il vous plaît. Monsieur Kessler.
Je sais pas trop. Okay, no, so I mean, thanks a lot, and sorry to be intervening in the late, just before lunch. I will be very short. So I mean, first, thanks a lot to AfCoDD. It's a very interesting conversation conference. I think the kind of the impact, the courage of the civil society in highlighting where things go wrong, in highlighting transparency, linking the need to manage natural resources that is proven by those 2 days, and so thanks a lot for the invitation. I really want to be very short. I think going back to the question of the risks that exist in the next couple of years. So I think we all talked about the risk of a debt crisis and that are raised by the financing issues. But the risks, I mean, that really exist is that in the next 2 years, the weight of the debt is not so much high that countries are turned to default. That's been occurring in a few countries in Africa, but most of them will try to avoid it. And how will they avoid it? By conducting a policy of austerity, of reducing spending, of raising taxes. And that will create a crisis of development before triggering a crisis of debt. The needs for spending in education, on infrastructure are huge. And if we let the system as it is to evolve, we're going to see a big lack of investment. So how should we do that? Should we go against that? I think we say a lot that the world is divided and that it creates huge problems to resolve those tensions. But there's a possibility to use those divisions. There's a demand for debt restructuring, a demand for participation of all, and the fact that there's all those tensions make that it takes very long. We can see that in the example of Zambia, which took 3 years to be resolved in a very unsatisfactory manner. But we can use that. And so how do we do it? By asking for more financing and more concessional financing. And I think that will go to the idea that debt is not bad per se, but that when it's cheap enough, we can it can achieve the need for investment that are there. So I'll do the last point. I think there's a lot of, especially in the first panel, the idea that transparency is something that comes from forcing the government to be transparent, and that's very important word. But debt is a two-way relationship. There's a lender and there's a borrower. The lenders have taken a lot of, they emit, every couple of years a principle, and they submit to these principles, and then when we ask for them to be really transparent, they don't show the data at all. And so I think the pressure can come from, pressure on the government, but also on the lender, whether they're private or official. And that's, again, something on which we can use the global divisions that exist. Okay, that's that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Kessler. So this brings us to the end of this session.